and to the noble person to whom it is addressed. To the Right Honourable the Earl of Bute. My Lord, when the bills were yesterday delivered to me by Mr. Wedderburne, I was informed by him of the future favours which his Majesty has, by your Lordship's recommendation, been induced to intend for me. Bounty always receives part of its value from the manner in which it is bestowed. Your Lordship's kindness includes every circumstance that can gratify delicacy or enforce obligation. You have conferred your favours on a man who has neither alliance nor interest, who has not merited them by services, nor courted them by officiousness. You have spared him the shame of solicitation and the anxiety of suspense. What has been thus elegantly given will, I hope, not be reproachfully enjoyed. I shall endeavour to give your Lordship the only recompense which generosity desires, the gratification of finding that your benefits are not improperly bestowed. I am, my Lord, your Lordship's most obliged, most obedient, and most humble servant, Samuel Johnson. July 20, 1762. This year his friend Sir Joshua Reynolds paid a visit of some weeks to his native country, Devonshire, in which he was accompanied by Johnson, who was much pleased with this jaunt, and declared he had derived from it a great accession of new ideas. He was entertained at the seats of several noblemen and gentlemen in the west of England, but the greatest part of the time was passed at Plymouth, where the magnificence of the navy, the shipbuilding in all its circumstances, afforded him a grand subject of contemplation. The commissioner of the dockyard paid him the compliment of ordering the yacht to convey him and his friend to the Eddystone, to which they accordingly sailed. But the weather was so tempestuous that they could not land. Note: at one of these seats, Dr. Amyot, physician in London, told me he happened to meet him. In order to amuse him till dinner should be ready, he was taken out to walk in the garden. The master of the house, thinking it proper to introduce something scientific into the conversation, addressed him thus: "Are you a botanist, Dr. Johnson?" "No, sir," answered Johnson, "I am not a botanist; and," alluding no doubt to his near-sightedness, "should I wish to become a botanist, I must first turn myself into a reptile." End of note. Reynolds and he were at this time the guests of Dr. Mudge, the celebrated surgeon and now physician of that place, not more distinguished for quickness of parts and variety of knowledge than loved and esteemed for his amiable manners. And here Johnson formed an acquaintance with Dr. Mudge's father, that very eminent divine, the Reverend Zachariah Mudge, prebendary of Exeter, who was idolized in the West both for his excellence as a preacher and the uniform perfect propriety of his private conduct. He preached a sermon purposely that Johnson might hear him, and we shall see afterwards that Johnson honoured his memory by drawing his character. While Johnson was at Plymouth, he saw a great many of its inhabitants, and was not sparing of his very entertaining conversation. It was here that he made the frank and truly original confession that ignorance, pure ignorance, was the cause of a wrong definition in his dictionary of the word pastern, to the no small surprise of the lady who put the question to him, who, having the most profound reverence for his character, so as almost to suppose him endowed with infallibility, expected to hear an explanation of what, to be sure, seems strange to a common reader, drawn from some deep learned source of which she was unacquainted. Sir Joshua Reynolds, to whom I was obliged for my information concerning this excursion, mentions a very characteristical anecdote of Johnson while at Plymouth. Having observed that in consequence of the dockyard a new town had arisen about 2 miles off as a rival to the old, and knowing from his sagacity and just observation of human nature that it is certain that if a man hates at all, he will hate his next neighbour, he concluded that this new and rising town could not but excite the envy and jealousy of the old, in which conjecture he was very soon confirmed. He therefore set himself resolutely on the side of the old town, the established town, in which his lot was cast, considering it as a kind of duty to stand by it. He accordingly entered warmly into its interests, and upon every occasion talked of the dockers, as the inhabitants of the new town were called, as upstarts and aliens. Plymouth is very plentifully supplied with water by a river brought into it from a great distance, which is so abundant that it runs to waste in the town. The dock or new town, being totally destitute of water, petitioned Plymouth that a small portion of the conduit might be permitted to go to them, and this was now under consideration. Johnson, affecting to entertain the passions of the place, was violent in opposition, and half laughing at himself for his pretended zeal where he had no concern, exclaimed, "No, no, I am against the dockers. I am a Plymouth man. Rogues! Let them die of thirst. They shall not have a drop." Lord Macartney obligingly favoured me with a copy of the following letter in his own handwriting from the original, which was found by the present Earl of Bute among his father's papers. To the Right Honourable the Earl of Bute. My Lord, that generosity by which I was recommended to the favour of his Majesty will not be offended at a solicitation necessary to make that favour permanent and effectual. The pension appointed to be paid me at Michaelmas I have not received, and I know not where or from whom I am to ask it. I beg, therefore, that your lordship will be pleased to supply Mr. Wedderburn with such directions as may be necessary, which, I believe, his friendship will make him think it no trouble to convey to me. To interrupt your lordship at a time like this with such petty difficulties is improper and unseasonable. But your knowledge of the world has long since taught you that every man's affairs, however little, are important to himself. Every man hopes that he shall escape neglect, and with reason may every man, whose vices do not preclude his claim, expect favour from that beneficence which has been extended to my Lord, your lordship's most obliged and most humble servant, Samuel Johnson, Temple Lane, November 3, 1762. To Mr. Joseph Baretti at Milan. London, December 21, 1762. Sir, you are not to suppose, with all your conviction of my idleness, that I have passed all this time without writing to my Baretti. I gave a letter to Mr. Beauclerk, who, in my opinion and in his own, was hastening to Naples for the recovery of his health, but he has stopped at Paris, and I know not when he will proceed. Langton is with him. I will not trouble you with speculations about peace and war. The good or ill success of battles and embassies extends itself to a very small part of domestic life. We all have good and evil, which we feel more sensibly than our petty part of public miscarriage or prosperity. I am sorry for your disappointment, with which you seemed more touched than I should expect a man of your resolution and experience to have been, did I not know that general truths are seldom applied to particular occasions. and that the fallacy of our self-love extends itself as wide as our interest or affections.